Night school.
Night school.
So I was at the library 2 days ago, and a very insignificant synchronicity inspired me to pick up this book, which was just like Brooke was looking at a book, and she was saying out loud that she felt like the book was meant to be for some reason, and at the same time she said that. I looked in the table of contents of this book, and there's a chapter called Why Psychedelics Are Illegal. And I was like, yeah, that's interesting. So I turned to the page, and as soon as I turned to that page, she was at the same moment saying that she thought her book was meant to be, and as I turned to the page, the corner was folded on it. So like the page that I was most interested in already had a page folded.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, it's a quick book, and it's not dense, and I'm going to follow this insignificant synchronicity, which I don't think is a good way to make life decisions, but I think is a great way to decide on a book to read.
Sure.
For a couple days.
That's fine.
Yeah, so, and then also this book talked about the I Ching and presented the I Ching in a way that made it sound relevant and interesting to me for the first time. Because I don't know what the I Ching is. I thought it was actually another name for the Tao Te Ching or something. I had no clue. And I'm not going to go into what this said about the I Ching because I want to read the I Ching, talk about this book's insights on the I Ching as a separate episode.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, and it has something to do with like a 64-part shape that describes a universal or really common pattern in reality. So it sounds cool. And it has a lot to do with change.
Yeah, I've heard it referenced as like a tarot-esque divination thing. It's a Chinese thing, and it like based on your astrological information, like your birth information, there's like different parts of it that are relevant to you, something like that.
Cool.
But I haven't really heard a ton about it.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
So this book talked about the I Ching and pitched it in a way that was like, yeah, I want to read that. And then I went to the library today and stumbled into the I Ching. So I'm like, cool, I'm going to keep following this thread and like go check out the I Ching soon. This book is so it's called Trip by Tao Lin. He wrote a book called Taipei. No idea what Taipei is or who this guy is. And it might be Taipei. No, it's Taipei.
It's Taipei. Yeah. I've heard it, but I can't remember. I think it came up in like the Chi books that we read or that I read. But I can't remember what it is.
Okay, cool. It's called Trip, Psychedelics, Alienation, and Change. And it's a kind of a clusterfuck of a book in terms of its structure because it starts out talking about his exposure to Terrence McKenna and what he found really interesting about Terrence McKenna. Then he goes into a biography of Terrence McKenna, and he researched it pretty well. So I am guessing that this is the best brief summary of Terrence McKenna's life. Then he goes into his own drug history. Then he does a chapter on psilocybin, then a chapter on DMT, then a chapter on salvia, then a chapter on why psychedelics are illegal. But that chapter had also a bunch of random information thrown into it. Then a chapter on cannabis, and then an epilogue that describes an extended interview with Terrence McKenna's ex-wife. And the interview with Terrence McKenna's ex-wife, Kathleen, was all in third person. And he briefly mentions at one point earlier in the book that it might be interesting in a book to randomly switch to third person. And then he does it later in the book.
Really?
Yeah. So
this sounds like a collection of essays. Like it's so many different topics.
Yeah, it is. Collection. Yeah, it is kind of a collection of essays. I don't know if there is a thesis statement that would cover this book. I don't think there is. Just, and yeah, it's not called like assorted and loosely connected essays on drugs. It's just, it's titled like it's going to be a book with a specific subject, and then it's just not. But he's a fun guy.
What does it say below his name on the cover?
Author of Taipei.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. I don't know what Taipei is, and like I don't know what the book is or what the word means, but he brings up the book over and over again in this book. Like he's constantly plugging his last book. And
that's frustrating. When if now it feels like I'm not even getting this book totally unless I read. Like, do I need to understand all of this author's thoughts before he wrote this book?
He wasn't referencing it like it was a prequel. He was referencing it just like, and then someone said, "Aren't you the guy who wrote Taipei?" And then in his like always basing his timeline of his life off of how long before or after he wrote Taipei, and just treating it like it was a book that was important to him and others, and
Gotcha.
constantly referencing it in that way. I don't know a single thing about what's in the book Taipei besides that it talks about drugs a lot, and that it sounds like in the Taipei phase he was doing more pharmaceuticals and opioids and amphetamines and Molly, and in the trip phase he was doing more weed, salvia, DMT, mushrooms, acid, and
This is a rad boy.
this guy is interesting because despite his totally impulsive drug use, like he talks about like, oh, and then I decided I wasn't going to do it for a while, and then I did it the next day for really no reason. Like totally impulsive, chaotic personality, but has meticulously recorded the details of his life to such an extent that at one point he provides a chart showing a chart that shows his activity with each drug. Like he writes it down every time he does a drug.
Wow.
So he can chart out, like you can see opioids down and then mushrooms go up, and they just all like the psychedelics just end up. Like there's no down on the chart. They're just still going up when
It's
he
still
published
climbing.
the book. Yeah, so buy a stock in Tao Lin doing mushrooms.
Is he still alive?
How
old is this book?
dude, not a clue how old this book.
He's 37. He's still alive.
He's 37 now.
Evan's
okay.
over here already Googling him. That's awesome. He's 37, and
Taipei is like a fiction book novel.
Taipei's fiction.
Oh.
Okay,
I think Taipei is named after the city in Taiwan.
cool.
That sounds right. Yeah.
I figured that out. But, I think that's what it is.
If the microphones aren't picking it up, Evan says that Taipei is a city in Taiwan. Taipei is a fiction book. And I'm looking here at the beginning. It says like there's like 8 books written by him. And one of them's called E. 5 E's, 3 E's, and then 4 E's. And the first one is called Selected Tweets. So he's quite a character. He talks at one point about being on a mushroom trip, cutting all of the electronic cords in his room, deleting his social media accounts, and essentially vandalizing his publishing website with a manic message about how he's going to move into the country or something, and then waking up the next morning and going and buying a new computer. He destroyed his computer,
Yeah.
put all the electronics in a plastic bag, took them to the dump, like something so extensive to
I
get
can see
rid
that
of
happening.
everything.
Yeah.
For sure. When
Yeah.
you're on mushrooms, dude, and you look at a phone, you're like, what the fuck
What?
is this thing?
What is
It's like it's self-evident that it's toxic alien technology
Right.
from your perspective when you're
Right.
on mushrooms, which is a universal experience, which is interesting.
Yeah.
That's not linked to one individual's paranoid tendencies regarding technology and that manifesting because they're on mushrooms. It's a universal experience. Technology looks sick and wrong
Yeah.
when you're on mushrooms. So
Yeah.
might be something to that. And because this book is such a clusterfuck in its structure, I'm just gonna I tore up my Walgreens receipt as I read through it and marked pages, and we're just gonna go and I'm just gonna give you interesting tidbits
That sounds good.
because there's not some overarching philosophy here for us to chew on.
Except for get fucked up.
This is something that Terrence McKenna was told by mushrooms. I am old, older than thought in your species, which is itself 50 times older than your history. So he's saying that human history is 50 times older than we think, and mushrooms are older than that. Though I have been on Earth for ages, I am from the stars. My home is no one planet, for many worlds scattered through the shining disk of the galaxy have conditions which allow my spores an opportunity for life. Now, I don't know exactly where this other part is, but Terrence McKenna, according to Tao Lin, teaches about how the chemical structure of psilocybin is seemingly extraterrestrial because of its lack of close relatives, chemically speaking.
The
And
psilocybin specifically?
Yeah, no, it might have even been one species or like subspecies of psilocybin mushrooms specifically.
Interesting.
Even if I had the information, I don't know enough about chemistry, to explain why that's valid. So I'm just throwing it out there as a tidbit for us to put on the back burner.
Okay.
That it might be interesting to look into Terrence McKenna's ideas regarding the extraterrestrial nature of mushrooms, and it's one of those things that's like I mean, I don't want to share information as if it's true if I'm not even educated enough about the general subject to argue how it could be true. You know what I
get
mean?
you.
So I'm just like, fuck,
Yeah.
interesting. We should
Sure.
look into what McKenna said about that.
Yeah, that's good enough for me.
Let me, I'll flip around for a minute and see if I stumble into the chemistry shit he says about it.
It is an idea that I've heard before. The notion,
Oh, I haven't heard that before.
the notion that, like, I've heard the notion, I think even more broadly, that just all mushrooms are so different in the way that they function when compared to plants and animals, that it makes them seem like they come from a whole different evolutionary chain.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that they could be like aliens, or maybe we're all aliens. Maybe we all, like, all life forms originate from different places, but they
Yeah.
just come from a different place than we do, because
Yeah.
they don't work the same way as us. They're very different.
It'd be really cool to know enough about the natural sciences to be able to see that, to be able to have the lens to see, because I'm sure
Yeah.
that'd be fascinating to see, to understand how unique the chemical structure of mushrooms really is.
Yeah,
And I don't own that lens.
it's
Yeah.
expensive, that lens.
It is. It's just a lot of time.
Yeah,
And I just want the juicy stuff.
Yeah.
I just want the fucking frosting. In Legalize It All, a report, and this is skipping forward to the chapter on why psychedelics are illegal. In Legalize It All, a report in the April 2016 issue of Harper's, Dan Baum shared something the assistant to the president for domestic affairs under Nixon told him in '94. The Nixon campaign in '68 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. And then it goes on, this is so interesting about the intelligence agency's relationship with LSD, because the federal government classifies LSD as a Schedule I substance, meaning that it's both deadly and highly
no
likely
medical benefit.
to be no medical benefit and highly likely to be abused. But the intelligence agencies have had to defend their integrity by reporting that LSD isn't dangerous to defend themselves, because it's been revealed that they gave a shitload of people acid in the 60s.
Right. Yeah,
So-
MK Ultra.
So they've had to come out and say LSD is not dangerous. So this is from a Senate report. Here, let me skip back. Like the hearing itself, in which 7 current and former CIA employees were questioned, including Stansfield Turner, who said, "Let me emphasize that the MK Ultra events are 12 to 25 years in the past." 12 years in the past.
12 to
Give me a
25.
fucking
What does that mean?
break.
Even?
What are you talking about? Guys,
You're
this
not
was
sure?
days ago and I was drunk. And had been head of the CIA for only 5 months and was separated from Richard Helms by 3 heads. I found the Senate report darkly comical. The 2 sentences in the report that eventually most attracted my attention were from a quote of a lengthy staff study published by the Army in '59. The study analyzed, so published by the Army, not the intelligence agencies, my mistake. So this is what the Senate report says. There has not been a single case of residual ill effect. Study of the prolific scientific literature on LSD-25 and personal communication between Army Chemical Corps personnel and other researchers in this field have failed to disclose an authenticated instance of irreversible change being produced in normal humans by the drug. So the Army has released a statement saying that LSD has never shown residual ill effects in normal people,
And that seems,
but it's a Schedule I substance. And
that seems unlikely, that there's never been any bad effects.
right, I mean, does that depend on who you consider normal or
What you consider bad.
right?
But I've heard
So
I've heard stories of
The
it going
truth has
wrong.
got to be somewhere in the middle, right? Because
Yeah.
I also have met a couple of people who are not all there in a specifically acid way, and there's
Yeah.
actually, I think this might just be me being stereotypical or something, but having met a couple of people who are not all there in the acid way, there's a peculiar nature about them that I feel like you can develop a sort of clinical intuition for, where you can meet someone and you can kind of just be like, this person's done a little too much acid, or done a lot of acid and not integrated it into their character in the proper way.
Right.
You know, however you want to word that. I met a couple people, 3 people I can think of, and they have a specific kind of look in their eye and a specific kind of vibe about them.
Yeah.
It's a fucking problem, you know. Actually, 4, now that I'm thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I also agree that the Army's exaggerating the safety of LSD in this instance.
So they're just, God, it's crazy.
They just fucking say whatever.
They can just say it is always good or it is always bad.
They can just say both.
Just whatever they want, whenever it's useful. And if you,
I mean, there's a difference between the Army saying something and the legislative branch of the government saying something, but it's still, it just
there
makes
shouldn't
the
be.
federal government just look like a joke.
Yeah.
Just what are you talking about? It's completely harmless and a Schedule 1 substance. And it's neither of those things. It's not, it doesn't carry a high likelihood for abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And it has tons of medical benefits. And there's often residual ill effects. It's like all of that's bullshit.
Yeah.
He told this super interesting story about someone who worked for the CIA, Frank Olson, who was dosed involuntarily, which is a disgusting thing to do. And he sort of started snapping and getting paranoid and conspiratorial, or, I don't know, an enlightened CIA agent. He had worked in the use of microorganisms. Listen to this fucking sentence. This is a hell of a sentence. In the 1950s and 1960s, the CIA explained that Olson, who specialized in the use of microorganisms in biological warfare, had killed himself for unknown reasons.
He specialized in
microorganisms for biological warfare.
So chemical warfare. He was sending out viruses. That
Yeah.
kind of
So
shit?
he was a bad man, and then he did acid, and then he killed himself. Like, how is that for unknown reasons? Like, man, I don't know. I mean, he assisted the U.S. government in murdering thousands of people in a totally torturous and horrific way, dropped some acid and killed himself, and nobody knows why. It's like,
That's interesting because it wasn't. You stated that as though it would be obvious to me what you were thinking about it, but what I was thinking about it was this is like a guy that got suicided because he got out of line, or like he
he
decided.
did that too.
That too.
That too.
Okay.
So his long after he died, his son independently had a, what do you call it, forensic investigation into a dead body. What do you say? Autopsy done. And the person who led the autopsy concluded that he was killed. I can't fucking find the sentence right here. But the guy who did the autopsy was like, no, somebody clearly killed this person.
Shot himself twice in the back of the head.
No, he fucking jumped out of a window. And then, so, man, my bad. I can't find the quote. Doesn't matter. Read the book. So he jumped out of a window, and they're like, yeah, we don't know why he killed himself. It's like, first of all, he helped you guys do horrible things, and then you involuntarily gave him a drug that gives you a deeper insight into your own intentions, at which point he was probably horrified by himself.
Yeah.
And then, so the autopsy was done, concluded that it was likely homicide. And then later, the CIA inadvertently declassified documents that contained instructions for CIA assassins, and it had different nicknames for different methods of murdering people. And one of them was called dropping, and was exactly what happened to Olson. Was that the CIA had an instruction manual for how they told assassins to push people out windows to kill them and make it look like a suicide.
Wow.
And so it's like, well, the autopsy says that he was killed, and a family member who was close with Olson at the time of death said that he did not seem psychotic in the days before his death, but seemed like he was quiet and withdrawn and dealing with some sort of ethical conflict. So, yeah, it just makes me want to do every drug the CIA says we shouldn't do. It's so insane.
Did you hear about the book Chaos? The one that's about, not the one about chaos theory that you gave me, but the one about Manson. Charles Manson.
No.
It's a book. It's a book that came out recently, and the guy was on Rogan talking about it. But he was working on this. He was like a journalist who started looking into the Manson family and their potential connection with the CIA, and he ended up like quitting his job as a journalist and like spending 20 years doing nothing but studying this thing. And the book is about like the connections between the CIA and their various ways of like doing assassinations. And also about Charles Manson and his family of people and how he was being provided LSD by the CIA. The CIA was supplying him with LSD and like telling him how to best mind control these people. And the whole thing was a project to make the hippie movement look bad because Charles Manson was such a he was the scariest example of like a hippie commune kind of thing.
And it was all to protect the military-industrial complex from protesters calling it out on its bullshit.
Right. And this was late 60s, early 70s, which was right when the hippie shit ended.
Right.
That's when it became not cool anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's when people started saying things like, if you take psychedelics, you'll go crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, says who? Do the people who created those memes or central ideas want you to be more or less crazy, you think? Like
right.
What was the intentions? Let's track your ideas back to its source and let's question the intentions of those people. Did the federal government want to protect the mental health of its citizens in the 60s and 70s? And that's why they attacked the hippie movement. It's just fucking bonkers.
Yeah.
The CIA was giving hookers acid to dose Johns with while they watched in the hotel room through one-way mirrors.
That was called Operation Midnight Climax. I heard about that on Rogan too. I think it might have been the same episode.
Way, way, way worse than criminals.
Yeah.
That is absolutely diabolical.
It is so clever. It's so effective. They know what they're doing.
And if they wanted to figure out how mind control could be achieved by the use of LSD, which, like, what does that say about the intentions of our federal government? Like, what does that say about what they're trying to do? I mean, if they would do that,
it's to protect us from the enemies.
They did something disgusting for disgusting reasons. So it's like, what? You guys were trying to figure out how to mind control us with psychedelics?
No. It's for bad guys. It's for the bad guys.
Right? Like on what? Where? I'm trying to think in terms of somebody who would generally be sympathetic towards the federal government and say like, hey, I mean, what argument could you make? Hey, there was a new substance on the market. They needed to figure out what it was, so they did what they had to do to figure out what it was, and that was the only way that they could do it. It's like, maybe if their goal was to determine whether or not the drug was safe, but it wasn't.
No.
Their goal was to determine whether or not the drug could be used to control people's minds.
Yeah.
So, well, part of that was for interrogation.
Yeah, these
so
days
that's
like a truth serum kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not the most diabolical thing in the world. Every government wants to figure out how to interrogate people. I get that.
Yeah.
But it seems like they were trying to figure out how to mind control their own citizens.
For sure. Yeah.
You know?
And I believe that book Chaos also goes into the theory that that basically the CIA or maybe other elements of the government will use drugs in order to make people into assassins that would not otherwise be assassins. So, which would imply that like it's possible that things were like, I don't know, guy just all of a sudden decided to go kill John F. Kennedy, or like specifically talked about Kennedy's brother, Bobby Kennedy, who was also assassinated like 2 years after JFK was, in a similarly like completely vague, I don't know, guy just decided he wanted to go kill Bobby Kennedy. No good reason for it.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, they were using that book also goes into that idea.
This book had a really cool quote from a Kennedy. I can't remember which Kennedy is, but I like a lot of those fuckers, dude.
Yeah.
A lot of those Kennedys are pretty woke.
Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s been pretty active lately, talking about vaccines.
Yeah, I just pre-ordered a book that he wrote a foreword for.
Oh, nice.
About COVID-19. But the Kennedy, I can't remember which one it was, but he said about the fact that the government had done these experiments with LSD. The best way to prevent our government from doing something like this in the future is to understand exactly what they did and why they did it in the past. asking for declassification of all this shit, and some of it was declassified. But I mean, when the government declassifies something, it's just like, okay, so you're now willingly giving us whatever part of the information makes you look best.
Right.
You know, it's not like the government's just like, hey, we had a change of heart and we want to come clean.
We're really, we're just sorry, and we want to fess up about that.
It's like, you guys know this, so we're going to declassify this because it makes us look best.
Right. And the information that is declassified is, in often cases, horrible. But like, how many people actually see it, and how many people what percentage of the people that actually see it care or believe it?
Yeah.
A lot of them just go, ah, phooey, I don't know about all that.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty conspiracy
Just words
theory
on
to
a
me.
screen.
Which the CIA is the one that like pushed the idea of conspiracy theorist as a way to like
Right. They
people-
coined that
Yeah.
term. That was a meme engineered by the CIA
Yeah.
to convince people that it was weird to think that powerful people have plans.
and it is working now, still,
Yeah, it works really well.
right now.
It's really effective because even a lot of people will express a conspiracy theory and like say like this isn't a conspiracy. It's like, no, it is. That's what the word means. It's a conspiracy, as in like, it's a group of people conspiring,
Yeah.
which
If
people
two people made a plan, it's a conspiracy.
unconditionally people
conspiracy.
conspire. That's a universal behavior. People conspire.
Yeah.
And people like power. It's people conspire for power.
Yeah.
Powerful people are the best at conspiring for power. It's how they got all the power.
They're really good at
So
it.
they have the craziest conspiracies, the
Yeah.
broadest, most complex, overreaching, freedom-destroying conspiracies. But that somehow is like perceived as fringe. It's like
Yeah.
it should be totally fringe to assume that there aren't conspiracies. It's like, what
Yeah.
is wrong with you? You don't think people have plans?
Do you ever think about like what responsible use of that word is? Because like there are many people that would say that if they didn't believe the things that I believed in, would say that I am a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, of course, I'm interested in those kinds of things, but I don't know whether to say like I don't know when to use that phrase. Like should you just always avoid the phrase conspiracy or conspiracy theorist, or is there some like should you just try and present it in a different way and like push off any use of that word? Like maybe you should.
What I do, which I don't like, this is what I do for now, and it needs to be updated, is I frame myself as a radical and irrational conspiracy theorist who believes all conspiracies, so that it at least frees me up from a little bit of judgment.
Right.
Because
I get that strat. Yeah.
you just be like, I believe all sorts of things that you think are crazy, and I don't give a fuck. Then people are just like, all right, I'll just let him. It's like, there's certain people that people put in categories, and they go, I expect him to behave the way I expect people to behave.
Yeah.
And then people they put in categories and say, I don't expect him to behave the way I expect people should behave.
Yeah, I suppose
So that's
I do
my
do
way
that
of just
too.
saying, put me in the category of people who behave the way you don't expect, please, because I don't want your judgment on me.
Yeah.
And so I just say, oh, I believe every conspiracy theory. I love all conspiracy theories. And that's not true. I don't like,
Right.
I hear about all sorts of shit that I'm like, fucking whack jobs.
Yeah.
But
Sometimes I'll like, in order to make sure that they don't think I'm crazy, I'll like throw a crazier theory that I don't believe under the bus.
yeah,
Like, look, I mean, like, yeah, I think some weird things. Like, I don't think the Earth's flat though.
right.
Just throw flat Earth under the bus, and
Flat Earth has become a decent litmus test for whether or not you are someone who just believes everything
yeah,
on the internet. Like I saw, one of my roommates was watching a documentary on QAnon on Netflix or something, and it was just like, oh, everything QAnon says is crazy, and so I'm watching it, and I'm like, no, QAnon has shed light on a lot of good things, and then or shed light on a lot of bad things, and also said all sorts of crazy shit, you know.
yeah,
And then the lady on the TV that they're interviewing, of course, the craziest person they can find, is like talking about like, and the Earth could be flat. We really don't know. And I'm like, cool, so you failed. I'm not listening to you anymore.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
that's Terrence McKenna did that in a way that I don't like. The let's just throw crazier things under the bus to legitimize myself strategy.
Yeah.
He threw channelers, people who believe in reincarnation. Maybe not reincarnation. He threw so many things under the bus to be like, oh, you know, I don't believe in this, that, this, and this. You know, I don't
believe
sit
that
at the
these
table with those
psychedelics
people.
are an incredible technology.
Yeah, he believes that psychedelics transport a metaphysical aspect of the self to another location in space-time that provides one with invaluable information because higher beings in those dimensions want to help humanity evolve, and that mushrooms are an alien and all these things. And so to try to make himself sound more legitimate to people who prescribe to the dogmas of the natural sciences, he throws all these other things in under the bus. And it's like, but did you personally look into those things and conclude that they were false, or are you just throwing a bunch of things under the bus?
Right.
Oh, crystals was one of them. Like, crystals are real. Look into the evidence for crystals. Read a few books about crystals. Not that hard.
It's real easy to throw things throw things into the crazy bin when you haven't looked into it at all.
He distinguished himself from the New Age, which he called a flight from the psychedelic experience, and various other contemporary groups attracted to occult and mystical topics. I say this as a reasonable person, he said in '92. I want to keep stressing that. I won't sit at the same table as the channelers and the people who have good news about Atlantis and all of this stuff. And then there's another part where he like lists.
Do you believe in Atlantis?
Yeah, what does he mean by the good news about Atlantis? Because Terrence McKenna believes that life happens on cycles of 12,000 years, and we're almost at the end of one, and the end is nigh, and all sorts of Atlantis-esque shit. The type of train of thought that leads you to the conclusion that the era that ended the civilization pre our recorded history is about to like loop around again, and the world as we know it is going to end just like it did before, and we're going to be left as just a couple fossils. And like that whole train of thought, he seems like he's in the Atlantis train of thought, but he doesn't say Atlantis isn't real. He says, I won't sit at the table with the people who have good news about Atlantis and all that. So I
suppose Atlantis is mostly bad news.
Well, yeah, I don't know what the good news about Atlantis is. I don't know what he's talking about. I think it's a big red flag when someone tries to dismiss a certain body of philosophy by giving an example of that philosophy that isn't even a real example.
Right.
Saying, you know, a bit of the good news about Atlantis. Like, a lot of people talk about 12,000-year life cycles and astrological phases and Atlantis and all sorts of that shit. But the fact that you didn't actually share an articulated opinion from that body of thought and instead said the good news about Atlantis and all that stuff is telling that you don't know that stuff.
Because you're making up a character that's not even real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you can't criticize a real character who's an example of what you're criticizing, then just don't.
Yeah.
You know, just don't. If you're going to criticize somebody with a name and a face and explain what you disagree with. So, Terrence McKenna, you know what was really funny is Terrence McKenna, he reported that he had smoked weed every day, all day, for 27 years. And then he had a therapist who was like a marriage counselor that was a little anti-weed. And he felt that weed was affecting the ability of the therapy to be useful, not because weed was bad, but because the therapist's perception of weed was bad, but still that it was interfering with therapy. So he quit for a couple months, and he said to weed's credit that he had no negative side effects from quitting weed after 27 years of smoking it all day, every day. And then Tao Lin interviewed his wife, his ex-wife, and she was like, oh, he was insufferable for those 2 months. He had no sense of humor. He was miserable to me and the kids.
Wow. He was bullshitting, I think. Yeah.
He was capping, yeah. That sounds like something
that is something that somebody that smoked weed for 27 years every day, all day, that's what they would say.
That's what they would say.
And it was
that's
super easy. I didn't have any problem.
Yeah, no issue whatsoever.
I don't know why she kept asking me. I don't have a problem.
Yeah. Very, very human. And Terrence McKenna was like one of those guys that was looked up to as a guru figure who would say I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Like a person, one of the metaphors was, I think this was something that he heard from some higher entity in a trip, was a person looking to another person for the truth is like a grain of sand asking another grain of sand for the truth. And he believed in just having a direct connection to the divine. And he's like, don't listen to me, but I'm a professional lecturer, so please come to my lectures. And he's one of those guys that's like, just like a really great, brilliant, flawed man who said, don't listen to me, I'm a flawed man, and then was. And so you can't blame him. You know, he's not like one of these televangelists who's like, listen to me, I have the word of God. And then he's fucking masseuses on the weekend. Like, he was somebody who tried to take himself off that pedestal, but he was still on that pedestal because he was brilliant. And his ex-wife said that he was a narcissist, but that he was a member of a long lineage of brilliant narcissists that are just people who get so obsessed with their ideas that they're married to that. You know, that's not what she said. That's my own
interpretation.
Yeah, interpretation. I was going to use the word for, you know, when like a theologian writes a book about scripture, but he gives his own stuff on it at the same time. What do you call that? Like narrating ideas as you express them?
Notation?
No.
What did you say?
What do you call it when now I'm off topic trying to think of a word that I don't even need, but I always do this while I'm talking. When a theologian writes a book about ideas and they give their own like narration of the ideas and their own interpretations of the ideas.
Insight?
No, but yes, all of these words work. I don't
Words?
need the word I'm looking for. The word I'm looking for isn't necessary to express my point. What is it?
Liturgy?
Nope.
I don't know.
Alchemy.
Alchemy. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
It's alchemy?
no. No, anyway, the thing about like he was married to his ideas and, you know, instead of his wife, that's just my own interpretation of what she said, but he's fucking awesome too, you know, and I want to read more of his stuff after reading this, but I love the way that Tao Lin in the first couple chapters describes the way that Terrence McKenna thinks and what's so valuable about the way that Terrence McKenna thinks, and then by the end of the book takes him off of that pedestal, because that is what we should do with people. We should look at people and go, that's what I want to be like, and then grow in their direction until we're close enough to see their flaws and then redirect at a new idol. We should conditionally hold idols without ever losing sight of the fact that God is our ultimate idol, that the ideal of ideals is our ultimate idol, but go like, you're closer to the ideal than me, and slingshot in that direction and then slingshot away. And he walks you through the whole process of how he did that with Terrence McKenna as an idol in this book, which is really cool. And the fact that I don't have more positive things to say about Terrence McKenna is just a consequence of the fact that I picked this up at the library, blasted through the first 150 pages where he praised Terrence McKenna and didn't start marking until later, because then I was like, oh, I'll finish this and do it on the podcast tomorrow, and then took notes for the rest. And so plenty of good about Terrence McKenna in here, and how the way that he thinks helped Tao Lin think better. Like he talked about trying not to believe in anything, because belief he felt was like getting glued to a finite concept, and that if you didn't believe in anything in particular, you would always be better at discerning truth. Because he was an anti-ideology guy, which is something Peterson talks about a lot too, being anti-ideology, which is really tricky because the very concept of being against ideology is ideological. Like to say, it's a never say never problem, where you say never by saying it.
Yeah.
So like to say all ideology is wrong, don't get stuck on any ideas. Like then if you get stuck on the idea that you shouldn't get stuck on ideas, you're kind of an anti-ideology ideologue.
I get what you're saying.
Which is not good either. And so it seems like being perpetually open to ideas requires a sort of maybe, maybe not approach to everything.
Yeah.
Not like I don't think that I'm an ideology-free zone is quite the right approach.
Yeah. This is almost like the chastity and skepticism idea. that like what was it?
Yeah.
Skepticism is the chastity of the intellect,
Yes.
and that chastity has no value if you're not willing to, if you're not waiting for, like if you're just waiting for nothing,
Yeah.
then there's not really a point in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm kind of yeah, we've talked about this before. I saw a spiritual director a couple times who was a Catholic woman that was my mentor, John Roach's mother.
Okay.
And she had told me at one point, I told her that I had decided to follow Jesus. And she had told me she was really excited when I told her that. Like, because I had talked to her about all sorts of metaphysical concepts rattling around in my Alan Watson, Jordan Peterson educated head.
Yeah.
And I was looking for direction. And I was like, no, I'm a Christian. Like, this guy is the guy. And she smiled and got really happy and said, you don't, a mind, like, what was it? Something about open mind and how an open mouth doesn't get fed until it closes on something. Like an open mind isn't fed until it closes on something.
Okay.
And that, I'm butchering her words, but I
get what you're saying.
That imagery, like my mind has to close around something
Right.
to be a mind. That's an anti-Zen concept, because it seems like the Zen concept is like, oh no, leave it fucking wide open all the time. Don't close it around anything. So could be right, could be wrong.
Which is also like anti-ideology, ideology.
Right.
Yeah.
It is.
It's complicated.
Mm-hmm. Fun to think about.
Yeah.
We've talked before about the fact that in 300 something AD, there was a Roman emperor who deemed Christianity the official religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I've brought that up as the moment in which the church was formed, as in the church, as in the building, structure, organization of Christianity, as opposed to the grassroots movement of people trying to live the way educated by the person of Jesus.
Right. That's when it became like a large-scale organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a real dark thing that happened for
Yeah.
Jesus followers and people who wanted to practice their own spirituality and have freedom of speech and freedom of worship. You know, it was a horrible thing that happened. And this book talks about another angle of that, because all sorts of brilliant philosophers, including Plato and Aristotle, had done this specific psychedelic ceremony where they drank something called kykeon, Kykeon. I don't know how to pronounce it, in a building called the Telesterion. And experts think that the drug was a naturally occurring substance similar to acid. All these great men had done it and found it valuable. And when that Roman emperor made Christianity the official religion in 396, he destroyed that tradition. They literally destroyed the temple where it happened and everything, and outlawed it.
This was that new book that came out that Sarah was telling us about. The guy was also on Rogan.
The history with no religion, with no history, with no name.
Yeah.
Shit like that.
The secret history of the religion with no name.
Yes.
Yeah, they were using that Kukion. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like opening their third eye or whatever, turning them into gods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the goddamn Christians, so-called Christians.
The like government Christians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The state crucified the Telesterion, where it happened. So
It hasn't been 3 days yet.
It's a damn shame. What do you mean by 3 days?
Meaning like the Telesterion has not come back from the dead after being crucified.
Right.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. Or maybe there are them. Maybe they exist some places.
Yeah, maybe they do.
Who knows? Let's grab another random snippet.
Cool.
Oh, this is the one I just marked where she said that he was insufferable for those 2 months.
I want to hear it.
Yeah, you want to hear her wording? God, this is so funny. podcast is still on.
They're entertained.
Man, I can't find it. She called Terrence a narcissist, and a few sentences later connected him with a history of brilliant narcissists. She observed this didn't make him a good husband or father. She said he used to smoke cannabis heavily when it was illegal even medically, in the house's central location where their children sometimes played with friends. So he's pretty reckless.
Yeah. That's pretty extreme.
Oh, here we go. The next page is marked 2. Maybe this is where it is. Tao said he'd heard Terrence in a trialogue on cannabis say that when he abstained from cannabis for 2 months, he read more and his dream life became more interesting, but he was otherwise unaffected. Kathleen said he'd been miserable and overbearing with seemingly no sense of humor those months, a nightmare to be around for her and their children. That is so funny, dude.
That is really funny.
He's just a guy. He's just a freaking idiot like everybody else.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that this part was interesting here. Tao this is in the section at the end where he's giving a third-person account of his conversation with Kathleen, Terrence McKenna's ex-wife. And he seems to describe himself as a person with constant overthinking social anxiety. And I don't know if he just finds it a bit quirky and relatable to write about the thoughts of that aspect of his psyche, that part of the psyche that we all have, that watches our behavior and goes, oh, don't do that for that reason. And it's a part of the psyche that's almost always internal. You rarely say out loud, like, hey, we just made eye contact for a little too long, but there is those thoughts in the back of your head all the time. And he writes about them a lot. So I don't know if he's someone who constantly struggles with extreme social anxiety and overthinking, or if he's just doing kind of a Michael Cera bit and just talking about that aspect of the psyche. Either way, I really like the way he describes it because I think it's very comforting for people to hear acknowledged that those sorts of thoughts go through other people's heads too. But this is such a lucid description of that. At some point, he began to suspect his laughter might be disconcerting, inappropriate. This is him talking about himself in third person. Inappropriate.
Oh, it's third person like that. Okay.
Yeah.
He's right.
Which is...
He's writing the true story of the interview from a third person.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And
that's bizarre.
Third person is the right way to write about that aspect of the psyche because that's what it is. It is a dissociated element of the psyche.
I see what you're saying.
Removed from the immediate experience.
Yeah. That
the majority of your psyche is having.
Yeah.
And it's looking at you as though you're a separate character than it, judging you. But then at some point he began to suspect his laughter might be disconcerting, inappropriate, offensive, or disturbing. He realized he'd laughed, maybe loudly, as if at an unexpectedly funny joke, after Finn said his 35-year-old friend, who had recently undergone hip surgery, would be in the class the next day. But it hadn't been a joke. Finn had been directly answering a question about who else would be in the following day's class. Tao wasn't sure, and in the confusion didn't ask why Finn, who seemed to ignore his laughter, had focused specifically on his friend's age, saying 35-year-old before anything else. Finn was 38. How was 35 significant? Had he misheard something? After that, Tao became quiet and humorless, losing his sense of tone and long-term purpose. His voice now sounded lifeless and agitatedly monotone to himself, as if he wanted to be alone. The walk began to seem flickeringly, harshly, unsteadily surreal. That's such a good description of how you question your behavior and then criticize your behavior and then dissociate from your immediate experience.
Right.
That really happens.
Yeah.
And I think it's a danger of psychedelics, things like that happening more, because the way that psychedelics remove you from behavior patterns that can normally go unspoken when you're soberly embedded in consensus reality, and when you're when you're in a psychedelic state, you have the opportunity to observe normal patterns as though they're foreign and alien to you, which can allow you to change your behavior almost miraculously, but also can dissociate you from the normal patterns where it's like, you're like, how am I sitting? How am I speaking? What's my tone of voice? Because all the ways I'm behaving right now as a sober person, I don't have to think about.
Right.
It's all muscle memory, and I'm like, oh, we do this, we do that. I don't have to think about it. Then there was one time I was on mushrooms in the woods on a camping trip, and a group of sober people, a couple of whom I was acquainted with, stopped by and invited me to go on a walk. So I went on a walk with them, and about 15 minutes into the walk, I got super high, and all of a sudden was like, why do people walk places? Where are we going? What am I supposed to do? How long are we going to walk? How long have we been walking?
Yeah.
And then the acquaintance stops and pets a dog, and it's me and like 7 sober rednecks. So like extra sober, because rednecks are very grounded. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they were going on a walk just to enjoy nature and look around, and that was completely fucking foreign to me. I was like, where are we going and why and how am I supposed to behave? And we stopped, and the acquaintance that I knew was petting a dog and interacting with a stranger and just being lovely. But I was just like, why the fuck is this guy petting this dog? Like, doesn't he understand that 6 or 7 of his friends are just standing here waiting for him to finish petting the dog? How long are we going to be standing there? At a certain point, I should just walk away, right? Because I need to get back to my camp, because I don't know how far I am from my camp. And so having an experience like that, it's like, it's potentially transformational if you look at your regular thought patterns and decide to become more intentional about things that are normally unconscious but that do need a second look. Like you go like, man, I always, like what's something that I've realized? Trying to think of one of those psychological patterns that I've recognized on psychedelics that's been useful.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
The idea of like, why do I do that? I should not be that's wrong for me to be doing that way.
Right.
And then you sincerely don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah. So one for me is like the habit of writing music in a way that is too pre-planned and structured, because I realized, wait, there's an aspect of my psyche that seems to pour out in stream of consciousness music. So what I do is I open that hatch and I allow that to flood in, and I write down 1 line and I shut the hatch. And then I open it up a little bit and then I write down 1 line and I shut it again, instead of just Lil Wayneing it and just opening the motherfucker up and just going.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, oh, like I just assumed that that's how you write music. The way you do music is you think and you write, and you think and think and think and write and write and write, and you plan out how it's all going to go, and then you move into the process of recording the music, and then you do that in organized ways in a way that's as organized as possible, so that you are able to capture exactly what you intended to capture.
Right.
And I realized that process of translating from the subjective aspect of the psyche to the objective in such a back and forth way was like involving an unnecessary middleman. And then instead I can just go into the studio, do what sounds good immediately, not really think about it. And now I can reliably choose a beat, write a song, record the song, and bounce it in 2 hours. And I used to be someone who would like work on a 5-track EP for 6 months, like just sitting around thinking.
Right.
So that's like an unlock. That's just like bang. Psychedelics can just go, here you go. Here's a cheat code.
Yeah. Get rid of that producer you keep inviting. You don't need him.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's an example of breaking a pattern in a way that's constructive. But to go back to my social anxiety thing and like questioning normal norms thing, if you do too many psychedelics in too much isolation, you'll get so distant from the established patterns of social interaction that it'll be hard to reincorporate yourself into social environments, and it'll make you a bit autistic, in the sense that like autistic people can hone in and do brilliant things that other people can't in isolation with greater resilience, but then have trouble flowing with normal interactions. It can make you a little bit that if you question everything over and over again and break your patterns over and over again and reprogram yourself over and over again to your own ideas in isolation. Like, because when I interact with you, it programs me to behave a certain way.
Yeah.
And so that I'm able to enjoy interactions with you seamlessly.
Yeah.
But if I do too much reprogramming in isolation, then I program myself to something that doesn't synchronize with anyone very well.
Right.
So I'm rewriting my code, and then I come to you and I'm like, hey, I'm brilliant. I've done acid 100 times. I've written a whole new language. Nobody speaks, you know, and it desocializes a person
Right.
if done in excess. So,
Yeah.
so and this is someone who impulsively does drugs constantly. And so I'm listening to all of these, like,
Do you mean Terrence or Tao?
I mean Tao Lin.
Okay.
And Tao Lin is describing the way that he overthinks social interactions and panics. And so going back to my first point, I don't know if he's just leaning into that and describing it because it's relatable, or if he really genuinely struggles with that constantly. But it did remind me as I was reading it that that's a genuine danger of psychedelics. That deprogramming can be desocializing.
Mm-hmm.
And deprogramming is the benefit of psychedelics, but desocializing is the danger. Not
Yeah.
the only benefit, not the only danger, but that's like two sides of the same coin.
Totally.
To me.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So I marked that page because I thought it was interesting. Now I really don't care to talk about it, but he, just to emphasize the clusterfuck that this book is, in this like epilogue at the end where he's third person describing his conversations with Kathleen and a couple other characters, he randomly inserts a couple pages about the problem of pesticides in foods, which is like, I'm reading, I'm like, damn, good to know. That's a really interesting history of pesticides in food, but it was seemingly totally unrelated to anything.
Should have been an appendix, probably.
Yeah, and then there's an appendix too, and for anyone considering reading this book, it has a really fascinating 64-point appendix. And I say 64 because that's significant because he talks about what's cool about the I Ching. The I Ching is like this body of philosophy that has some sort of 64-sided reality pattern. And so at the end, he does a 64-point appendix about Terrence McKenna's ideas regarding how the world is made of language, and some chemistry stuff about how chemicals and atoms, genetics and DNA are made of language. And I'm sure what he does is really interesting.
That does sound very interesting to me.
Right?
Yeah. That
And
sounds,
so
yeah.
I'm leaving it for the I Ching episode, and we're going to weave it into that. But it's pretty cool, and yeah, I recommend this book. It was fun. It's like a 4-hour read. It's not like dense information, but it's a lot of information that bounces all over the place. I marked a page that I never got to, or never like got around to. A lady who spent a lot of time studying salvia describes how an Aboriginal tribe uses salvia to communicate with a wise feminine spirit. And the process that they describe for using salvia is so different than the way we use salvia in our culture that it's no wonder all we do is punch windows.
How do we? I don't know much about salvia. When you were reading off the table of contents, I was particularly interested in
Cool.
the salvia thing because
Yeah.
I don't know much about it. I associate it closely with spice, but I'm pretty sure it's totally unrelated.
But because back in the day, maybe 10 years ago, you
Mhm.
could buy it in a smoke shop.
Yeah, it was a
So
head
it
shop
was
thing.
branded similarly to spice. That was
Yeah.
the only thing. And we don't know what it is in our culture. You know, we knew we could buy it at the smoke shop and it would do something weird if you smoked it, and
Yeah,
only the really adventurous people would do it.
or the
'Cause it
people
was-
that wanted to get high and had to pass a drug test. Like that's
Yeah,
that's one of those things. I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
So these people, this Westerner went out and talked to them, and they said, if you dry up salvia and smoke it, that would be really offensive and violent from the perception of the spirit that we use salvia to communicate with. Like,
Huh.
she would find that really invasive and violent and distasteful. Here's how they do it. The plant grew in filtered light in little glades in the woods and liked to be moist and cool. They always refer to it as her, and I try to do that too, said Harrison. She's very shy, she's very powerful, but she's very shy. The Mazatec grow her off the trail to keep her clean. They compared her to the deer, which are startled away by noise or quick movements. Harrison waited years before telling them salvia had gotten out and people were smoking the dried leaves. They were appalled by the drying, doubly appalled by the smoking. That won't work. That will just really offend her. Harrison said that they said, she won't show up. Whatever you're getting, it's not her. The Mazatec ate salvia in pitch dark, rolled up wilted leaves like a large salad rolled into a cigar. Before the experience, they stated their intentions, which they returned to throughout in a kind of murmuring prayer. They did not do it to see what will happen. They did it asking for help, a gift, or a favor. They said not to do it alone. Sitting close, they guarded the person doing it because of the bolt factor, that around 10% get up and start moving and later don't remember what they did. And I've heard of that from secondhand stories. People just stand up, walk around, do something weird. They said not to laugh because laughter scares away the spirit of the plant. People have experienced salvia as being something that gives them the uncontrollable giggles, said Harrison, and shared an example. She knew a Buddhist who fell passionately in love with a toaster after smoking salvia, and that so amused him that he found himself rolling on the ground laughing. And when he came out of it, he was just like, I've been a Buddhist monk for decades, what happened to me? Which reminded me of the fifth and most recent time I smoked salvia. Now this is the author speaking. On my sofa in my room in July 2014, I became aware of myself talking to my bong. Yeah, we go from like a dark cave surrounded by shamans to on my sofa.
So anyway, I'm getting stoned on my couch.
It's really the same shit. You know, it's just
Right.
I mean, whether you're sitting in the dirt in a teepee or you're sitting on a couch, it's like whatever.
Yeah.
You smoke salvia. Well, they don't smoke it though. They just eat it.
So they just eat the leaves.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, that's how they do it. When I realized I was earnestly asking for my bong for advice on what to do about feeling lonely, I said, the bong can't tell you, aloud in a playfully scolding tone, then laughed hysterically for a while. Harrison called the toaster experience amusing and even interesting, but said it wasn't what she was after personally. She desired a relationship with the species spirit. She was fascinated by their worldviews, but fascination wasn't the main reason she directed her attention to the Mazatec and other aboriginals. It was because she felt that after doing it for so long, they'd figured out the spiritual and behavioral technology of relating to Salvia divinorum and other species in order to get the best result, which she defined as the most rebalancing of oneself so that one could do work in the world that is balancing also. So, man, I mean, if you think about the fact that these people tens of thousands of years ago stumbled into peyote, mushrooms, salvia, and DMT and ibogaine, and now they've certainly lost many lives and many minds to the process of experimenting with plants. And they have now found the plants that are useful and found exactly the most useful way to use those plants. And now, because the federal government won't let us play, we're just starting over the whole goddamn process, and we're just on our couch smoking salvia, you know? And without asking these aboriginals for advice, it would take us another 50 years to realize that we're supposed to appease the spirit of the plant by rolling it into a salad cigar and eating it in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all so silly. Like these plants, those like 5 or 6 psychedelics that are demonstratively beneficial and unharmful physiologically, that just has a circle with a line through it over it. It's crazy. And we don't even know how to use them correctly because we're not allowed to talk about it or study it. You can't even, it's hard to even get funding to study it. It's hard to get approval to study it because of the taboo, and it's hard to get funding to study it because it's not that profitable. It's not like if we found a good pharmaceutical, we're going to make a bill off of it. It's like we're not going to get anything from studying this besides helping people. Who wants to, like, who are we going to ask? Elon Musk?
Right. Yeah, maybe Elon Musk. Yeah.
He probably already does.
Yeah.
I've seen from a couple sources that Elon Musk does acid and Molly, and he's probably funding that. He's doing everything.
I wanted to share a Graham Hancock story that like the salvia stuff reminded me of, because it's a lot like, well, so ayahuasca is DMT activated in the stomach. Typically in your stomach there are, if I remember correctly, I think they're called MAO inhibitors, or they're MAOs in your stomach. And those chemicals in your stomach make it so that your body doesn't break down DMT. It like blocks your body from breaking down DMT, which is kind of oddly specific that that's something that we have in us, but it stops your body from breaking down DMT. But if you eat this other thing and then you eat it, you eat an MAO inhibitor, that turns those things off. So then you can eat DMT and it'll activate in a different way, similar to how edibles activate differently from smoking weed.
Mm-hmm.
So those two plants, the plant that they get the DMT from and the plant that they get the MAO inhibitor from, they're not even from like the same part of the Amazon. They're like far apart from each other, but these tribes for a long time have been gathering both of them and doing ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And when they do ayahuasca, they always meet with the same feminine spirit, but sometimes she appears differently. And Graham Hancock refers to her as Mother Ayahuasca, but often a snake, often a jaguar. That's the things that I've heard. But it's always a feminine spirit that they would meet.
Mm-hmm.
And Graham Hancock said that in like asking people, like, how did you figure this out? They said it wasn't trial and error. They said that they were told this.
Yeah.
And he wasn't specific about who it was that told them, but like
they
were taught this by somebody and that knowledge has been passed down. So they didn't just go, what if I eat this, then this? For hundreds of years.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Tao Lin brought that up in the book, and he said that I don't like the way that he thinks about this. I felt like this book is not scientific. You know, this is a really interesting guy just kind of spitballing about all this shit. This is not a research paper. There's some shit that he said that was just dumb. One of which is that even though many different tribes throughout the Amazon have discovered ayahuasca in the way that you just described, through communication with plants and spirits, he thinks that they all discovered it independently through trial and error. And he said that it makes perfect sense to him that people curious and obsessed enough would find it eventually, because the Japanese version of Super Mario Bros. Unlocked another 260 something levels. If you took the game out while the game was still on, put in an unrelated tennis game, played that for a little while, took it out and put Super Mario Bros. Back on, it would unlock a bunch of extra levels, and a bunch of people throughout Japan discovered it eventually. Like, not a single person discovered that just on accident. No, they didn't. You always turn the console off when you take the game out. You would never take a game out and put another one in without turning your N64 off, right? And the reason that all those people figured that out about the game was because the 190 engineers at Nintendo that knew about it told their friends, and it spread like wildfire because it was super interesting.
Yeah, totally.
And so in the same way, and 190 is a random number, I'm just spitballing, but obviously that information is more likely to have spread through word of mouth than through blind trial and error.
Right.
And so to compare that to the ayahuasca thing was just bonkers. And it's like, well, they knew because someone told them. And the Amazonians are telling you the same thing. They know because someone told them.
Yeah.
But the someone who told them is not human. So the dogma of natural sciences would call that heresy. But something interesting McKenna said that Tao Lin quoted was that everything's talking. Humans are just deaf. Humans talk, and they love the idea that they're the only ones talking.
I like that.
Yeah, and Jill was saying recently she's reading a book about plant consciousness, and she wants to come on and do the book.
Well, that'd be fun.
She heard about it in an NPR special about I think it was a lady who wrote a book about how plants communicate and what that means about plant consciousness. And so she ordered the book that the NPR segment was on and is reading it. I haven't checked in a couple weeks where she's at with it, but...
Do you remember what it was called? Because I heard about one of those recently.
No idea.
They talked about it on Mysterious Universe. They were talking about a plant consciousness book that was recent. Yeah.
That's one of those scientifically backed ideas that can just take you down the rabbit hole. You know what I mean? Like it can break the matrix.
If
plants have consciousness.
If a plant can want something or talk to another plant, then what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It breaks that matrix of, I don't know. There's this sort of matrix established. There's this like materialism myth that says everything in the world is dead and unintelligent and unconscious except for people. You know, there's this like weird ego trip that I've been pondering a lot because I'm reading Maps of Meaning, and he talks about
who?
Could you look up
what's
who
the
wrote
author?
Maps of Meaning? And Jordan Peterson wrote Maps of Meaning. And he talks about the fact that there is a place for the subjective and a place for the objective. The subjective meaning that the world is considered to be a place that is a forum for action. The subjective, what should I do about what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And the objective, a place of things, a list of truths, a collection of data. And the collection of data can influence the subjective aspect of the mind. And it literally is. He breaks down the neuroscience of how the two hemispheres of the brain are oriented in one direction or the other, one towards the known, the order, the objective, one towards the unknown, the chaos, the objective. And as I'm thinking about that, it's like we've got this weird ego trip going on where people have leaned so far in the objective that they're blind to the subjective. And
Yeah.
even if they have 100,000 pieces of information, they don't know what to do with any of it because they're not psychologically grounded in a myth that directs their behavior. So they'll fall for the dumbest shit ideologically, philosophically, subjectively, because they think they know what they're doing because they have a list of 100,000 ideas in their head
Yeah.
about medical terminology and names of medications and names of atoms and places in the world, all this data.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do with it. And so I think that the idea that humans talk and other things don't is a good example of that objective, obsessed, human obsessed, materialist myth dominating Western culture right now. And it always excites me to hear that someone is breaking any aspect of that matrix, whether
Yeah.
they're delving
Yeah.
into, like, I almost feel equally excited if someone says they're getting interested in religion, psychedelics, aliens, consciousness, anything. It's just like, yes, please. We've got to get into that realm of things.
Yeah. Please acknowledge that this is weird.
This is so weird.
It's very
We don't know
strange.
what to do.
Yeah. Like
So-
I think like Aliens was that thing for me.
Right.
I think or more so the idea of telepathic communication with other beings that were giving us things that were objective.
Yeah.
Like we're getting objective data from this kind of strange type of communication, and that for me was enough to I guess that sort of shook me into being open to those things more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Terrence McKenna told a story about his wife almost getting abducted by aliens, like a UFO showing up and physically beaming her up and then not abducting her all the way. I don't know the details, but
What?
then Homeboy asked Kathleen about it in the interview in the epilogue, and she confirmed it.
Whoa.
And she said that they, which is interesting because he's a lot crazier than her.
Right.
Terrence was way crazier than Kathleen. So I was interested to see if she confirmed it, just like she confirmed the fact that he was an idiot pothead.
Yeah.
Like he's like a lot more out there than she is. And she's like, no, that did happen. And it seemed as though their intention was to remove me because I knew something I wasn't supposed to know, which sounds like a paranoid delusion. So sorry for all the people I just lost with that one, but that'd be really interesting to look into. Her UFO experience.
Yeah.
They didn't elaborate on the details. Whenever something comes up like that, I'm like, give me 100 details on this. Tell me everything. What are
Yeah.
you talking about? But they just kind of glazed over it.
Except for pesticides.
Yeah, 2 pages straight of detailed information about pesticides out of nowhere.
What
But-
can you tell me about it?
I can tell you that we're all eating pesticides, and it's making us less healthy than we should be, and more inflamed.
Shoot.
Yeah. Dang it.
How do I get rid of the flames?
CBD.
Okay, CBD. Buy CBD, folks.
You should, but it's really expensive.
Who's our CBD sponsor?
That's what I pitched Steve Lee when we were starting the podcast. I was like, dude, sponsor our podcast with your CBD company. And he's like, I'm not advertising CBD right now because it's selling itself right now. He wanted to advertise a cereal thing, and then it didn't work out. So
That's okay.
fuck CBD, fuck cereal, fuck the mayor of Kennewick Pro Tem, whoever that happens to be.
No, we don't mean that.
Steve Lee's awesome. I just made a Facebook the other day, and now I get to interact with Steve Lee, and that's one of the good things about making a Facebook again,
Nice.
because he's more on there. Yeah. Can't think of anything else I feel like spitballing about.
Nah. That was fun, though. Those are good spitballs.
Yeah. It's a really fun book to read.
Cool.
And I like art with bad structure.
Yeah?
Yeah, I like it. It's a good thing.
Or just unusual structure.
Yeah, I think it's... yeah, unusual is better than bad. It should be intentionally structured in a way that's atypical rather than structured randomly. But I think there's something very conscious about it that I really like. It feels like a creation that was intentional and original rather than just like, well, I want to write a book, so what's the format for book, and I'll follow that.
Which reminds me a lot of your anecdote about music and about your feelings about the structure of music and what it should be, and then sort of letting go of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because some of the time that I've done that, since having those psychedelic insights and doing music better, sometimes I'll go to the studio and feel like I'll just rap like a long ass verse and then just throw a little chorus at the end, and I'm like, yeah, that's what that was supposed to be, and I don't feel confined to. Or like me and Brooke went to the studio last week, and she wrote a verse, and I just plugged it in randomly and then wrote up into it, and then had Eddie change the beat and drop the hook after the verse, and we just put it together however, and it's just it's funny because it's more intentional and less intentional at the same time. It's less intentional in the sense that it's less premeditated, but it's more intentional in the sense that it is that more of my creativity is involved in the process than otherwise.
I get what you're saying. It's like a different. It's like well, they're both. It's like two different intentions. Like it's a different part of you's intention.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fun book. Thanks a lot, Tao Lin.
Good job, Tao
Fun
Lin.
read.
And good job, Terrence.
Yeah, good job, Terrence. We still like you, man.
Yeah.
Your ex-wife called you out, but
Not about the alien thing, though.
It is not about the alien thing. Yeah, so I mean,
Aliens are real? That's what the book was about.
acid is real. Aliens are real. You know who I really want to read soon is Albert Hoffman, the guy who synthesized LSD. There's all these legends that Albert Hoffman would bilocate. Like there'd be several reports that he was in two different places at the same time, or he'd be in one place and then inexplicably 2 hours later he checked in somewhere else, and he would always walk around with a suitcase. Just sounds so interesting. Because I mean, if you think about, I mean, if you buy the insane idea that I don't actually think it's insane. This is me trying to reframe the way that I do this, like we were just talking about.
Right.
If you buy the strange idea that communication with plant consciousness and extra-dimensional consciousness can give Aboriginal people access to psychedelics, which you should, then what does it mean that Albert Hoffman was the first guy to synthesize LSD? You know, like who the fuck was he talking to that gave him LSD? Like, how did he figure that out?
Don't know. Yeah, probably someone.
Yeah, I mean, it's just got to read. Sounded like he had supernatural abilities,
Interesting.
so it'd be
Yeah,
interesting
I'd love to hear about that.
read what he had to say.
Yeah. You good?
I'm good. Night school.
Night school.